All right, let me start the broadcast here. Great. All right, hello everybody. This is Nick Klosky with Honeypoint 3D, and I would like to welcome you to the June 2017 monthly 3D printing and 3D design webinar. I really appreciate everybody joining today, whether you are watching live or whether you watch on replay on our YouTube channel or both. I hope you have a good webinar, and as always, I really want you to ask your questions. I have a couple of questions stacked up. One from Juliana, who I see is online, so hi Juliana. But if you have any questions, please use the chat function. I want to make sure that I answer your questions on 3D printing, 3D printers, filament, 3D design, 3D modeling, rapid prototyping, really any of the above. I really want to make sure that if you run into any sort of workflow issues about how do you do something, how do you accomplish something, how to plan something out, any of that I can help you. A little bit of background that I give every month on Honeypoint 3D. We are a 3D file creation company. So half of our business is rapid prototyping, where people come to us with literally sometimes drawings on napkins that they've done at a restaurant, and we can take those designs and with our engineering skills and people, we can turn those into models for 3D printing or rapid prototyping or injection molding, all of the above. That's that half of the business. The other half of the business is we help create 3D models by teaching people how to create those models on their own. Through online education, we have classes on Meshmixer, Fusion 360, some other classes online, as well as individual consulting and these monthly webinars that are free. We find a lot of people who take our classes might get stuck with some project of their own, and I am more than happy to look at your files on this webinar, kind of help you through things without having to pay into our consulting service. It's kind of like a free sort of thing. We are also authors of this Maker Media book entitled Getting Started with 3D Printing. It looks maybe backwards on the video, but I can't really mirror it. But it's Getting Started with 3D Printing, published by Maker Media. It's the #1 selling 3D printing book on Amazon, and actually in the category above, which is graphic design or 3D graphics design. If you haven't read that book, I would suggest that you either get it there, or it's in actually lots and lots of public libraries. You can check it out there. And if you have the book or have read it and like it, it would be awesome if you could give some good reviews. We have, I think, 25 reviews on Amazon, and we're averaging 4.5 or 5 stars. So it's a well-received book. I want to welcome everybody here. Again, ask your questions. I'm going to be going over today some tips and tricks on meshes. I got a cool request this month about how to help with planning out, essentially putting a plate back in a skull, or putting a plate in a skull where a skull was damaged. And I found some 3D models actually online of a deformed or injured skull. So we're going to be using those models, and I'm going to show you how to use existing meshes in Meshmixer and kind of model around them as templates. I'm also going to be showing you how to do that in Fusion 360. Fusion 360 is a solid modeling tool, but it actually has some really good ways of working with meshes that other more expensive solid modeling tools don't, like SolidWorks and all of that. I'm not entirely versed in SolidWorks. I know quite a bit about Fusion. I use it every single day. So if anybody online has any suggestions about SolidWorks or how it might be better than what I'm saying, then that would be great. But I really want to focus on free tools that people can use in real life situations. And this is going to be a very great example of a real life situation involving, in this case, kind of surgical planning or surgical visualization to see how you would work with meshes in these two environments. Juliana asked a question that I want to bring up about why kind of working with meshes is difficult, right, in these different tools. Meshmixer is all about polygonal meshes that you would get from 3D scanners. I was just using my scanner today to do some scanning of some things. And you can get pretty accurate with Meshmixer, but if you want to do things like creating very specific offsets from other things, you can do that, but the moment you touch them with other tools, you kind of get into the idea that Meshmixer is digital clay. You can be accurate with clay, you can kind of smush it with different tools, but then once you start doing other things, you can start to get less accurate. For some uses, like organic modeling and just working with scans and evaluating them, Meshmixer is awesome. But if you want a little bit more control over the various aspects of what you do with those meshes, you might want to figure out how to do that in Fusion 360, which is what I'm going to show you. And it's kind of a cool thing, and it's something that I realized a couple months ago, but I've been kind of waiting to bring it up in these monthly webinars. So I look forward to showing you that. I don't have any questions yet. I'm going to switch over to Meshmixer while I am over there. No, actually, I probably can go like this and still see the chat. So let me share my screen. Like that. Awesome, and I still can't see the chat, so that's great. Okay, this is Meshmixer. This is a CT scan of a skull that I just found online. It's kind of just a commonly available thing. I went inside of it and just cleaned out some geometry to make it a little bit easier, and you can see that there is an obvious issue with this skull, right? So we're going to figure out how to put in a little kind of patch inside of there. Just some kind of overview things that I suggest. A lot of times, models may come in some, weird orientation like this. They might be, not, the person might have been laying on their side or something like that. So a couple ways to get this skull aligned with the base, which is going to help us later. You go to Edit, to Align, and you would say a surface point world origin Y up. And you kind of go up here and say, in a very vague sense, I want this front tooth to be up. So I click on that, and what that does is it puts right where I clicked on this little red dot, which is called the origin, facing up. If I clicked anywhere else on this, you can see the skull kind of dancing around. But I kind of generally want to say that I want the tooth to be facing up like that, and say accept. Now what I did is I selected a back tooth, so you can see that back tooth is on the origin right here. Usually this is a two-step process. Once you get this aligned, which it looks like it's pretty well aligned to the flat, you can go align again, and instead of saying surface point, you would just say base point and say accept. What that does is it says the base, kind of the center of mass of this object, or essentially the center of mass goes right on the middle. So that puts us there. One nice thing also when we're working with this is that you can turn on snapping. So if I hold down the space bar, these two things are kind of shaded. Now they're shaded, which means I can go anywhere. But if I turn these off and I say just snapping becomes shaded in, now it's going to snap. You can kind of see it kind of going click, click. When I go like this, it kind of clicks. It clicks into various views at a 90-degree increment in all directions. So that's very nice to look at this straight up. And now I see that the skull is not entirely aligned. I'm going to hit T for transform and just kind of move this down. Still doesn't look entirely right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put kind of the center point that I can see right on this line. It kind of helps me align it. And click accept. All right, that is nice. Now I'm going to turn snapping off because it can be sometimes annoying. If you don't see this grid on the bottom, you can say view and show grid, and that will show you the grid on the bottom. Okay, We want to get a patch inside of here. Now, you certainly can use this and kind of extrude it out into a different shape. There's a lot of different ways to do everything in solid and mesh modeling. But here is a way that is really, really kind of easy for this and doesn't get as much love in my daily use as it should. It's called the fit primitive command. So I'm going to say select. So what we're essentially going to do is bring out a plate onto here. Let me cancel that. One way that I initially thought of is bringing out, something like this or a cube and then dragging it on here and then kind of moving it and modifying it. And that kind of works, but I'm going to show you a better way for something that is very specific to this geometry. We're going to go into the select tool right here. Let me make my brush a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to select around, trying not to hit any of the back of the skull. Just try to be very careful with where that little red dot goes. I think that's good enough. The really cool command, I'll fill that in a little bit more, really cool command under Edit is fit primitive. You see it has a P key, which means that the makers of Meshmixer decided that it is warranting its own little hotkey. So we say fit primitive, you can fit any sort of things, a rectangle, a cylinder, disk from plane, a linear sweep, kind of interesting, convex hull. Actually, convex hull kind of is cool, but what I want to do is just do a square. The thing about fit primitive is based on your selection, it will fit that new shape that you add into the average of where you've selected. What this means is that this is kind of the average of this U-shaped thing that I selected, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to press W to turn on wireframe. I want to pretty much match the density that I currently have, both this slider up here. Pretty good. And I'm going to say create new object because I want this to be a new object. Our object browser right down here pops up and we have a new fit primitive. Great. I'm going to hit transform on this, the T key, and just kind of vaguely make it into the size and move this. What I want to do is I'm going to make it a little bit like this and a little bit wider. Make it vaguely the size of the place that we are working on. Now I'm going to go into sculpt and brushes to drag. Make my brush a little bit bigger. We're in a different object, so I'm not going to be affecting the skull at all. I'm just going to try to, in a very kind of rough sense, drag this to be pretty close to the outline of where I want it to go in an end sense. I don't have to be too accurate here. And you see, underneath here, there's a lot that's kind of extending underneath. I really don't need that. So what I can do is just select right here and then delete it. I might have a little floating piece underneath. The way that I can get rid of that is double click on this to select this entire object, hit I for invert, and then hit delete. You didn't really see it, but it inverted the selection to something here and kind of made that come down. This didn't turn out too good. I'm gonna just delete that and try to drag this up a little bit. I'm just trying to get it close. I'm not trying to get it to totally match, but just kind of close enough. And this is also another thing. A lot of things always pop up in these webinars. As I rotate around, you can see that I'm kind of starting to clip through all of this area right here. A trick to get rid of that clipping to allow you to zoom closer, because if we zoom closer, we start to lose the skull. A trick with this is to go into the select tool, select a little area, and say View, Recenter View. What that does is it recenters on the selection, and now you see I'm zoomed really, really close with no clipping. I rotate around, no clipping. So that's a little trick for that. This looks pretty darn good. Not good enough for surgical uses, but this is kind of the next step. This is an infinitely flat plane, as you can see. We don't want that. We want this to actually have volume. I'm going to double click on this to select the entire thing and hit the D key for extrude. Or you can go up here and say extrude D. I'm going to extrude it a little bit more like that. It gives me a kind of a good thickness, and say accept. All right, we have a thick object inside of here. Now here's the really cool part. I have two objects down here. I want to kind of match this to this object, so that is what the attract and magnet tools do. On the skull, I'm going to click this little magnet icon right here. It makes the skull go all transparent. For something like this, I don't want that because I can't really see the skull. I'm going to go up to view here and turn off transparent target. So now my target, which is designated by this magnet, is not transparent. It's normal color. I'm going to click back on fit primitive, which is my plane right here. Now we have this marked as a target. That's what we want. We go into Meshmix. Oh, I'm sorry. We go into Sculpt to maybe draw. Drawing is just adding. I just have my strength turned to, whatever I want. I can turn it up here. Refinement is on with refine and reduce turned all the way up. And here's the critical part. You go down into filters and you say, I want to attract to target a lot. I'm going to turn the attract to target down to 100%, 100 units. Now what happens is, I'm recentering my view with the C key, by the way. Let's go right here. Now, when I click on this, it's going to get sucked to the closest target. The closest surface of the target. So as I go on this, you can see it's getting sucked in. And if I keep my mouse down, you can kind of see all of these. That's the refinement going on, the refining and reducing. It's not actually creating more, it's just kind of doing that and just kind of sucking to the edge. I'll turn off wireframe. And this is the really kind of fun part. You just go around and it is being sucked to the closest part of your existing mesh. That's why I wanted to get this kind of close, because if it were far away, it might start getting sucked down to like the bottom of the skull or something like that. If you get it close, it is a very kind of satisfying, nice effect. I'm going in and there's nothing to really suck to down here, so we'll kind of leave that. Let's see what happens here, right? So this is pretty far away from the edge, and we click on this, it is getting sucked to the closest, which is down there. If we kind of keep going, it'll keep getting sucked there. So Meshmixer said that that face was the closest to that, which sounds right. If we do this with all of these, Meshmixer is going to say the closest part of that target, it just kind of shoots a ray out, was right there. Let's see if this works for the whole thing. Looks like it did. Sometimes you get a weird result, but that time you didn't. And I'm going to kind of zipper the rest of this up like this and go around. Missed a little bit up here, like that. Now we have a pretty nice feature. Oh, I think Juliana, let me see if I can bring the chat back. Okay, awesome. I'm glad, Juliana, that you had your questions answered. Yeah, that recenter thing with the clipping is a super annoying thing. I'm going to turn off attract to target now, so I'm just working on this. And you see it's still a little bit lower than what I would want. I am going to just hit the draw function, maybe make my cursor bigger. I'm using the right and left bracket keys. You can also hit the space bar and do it like this as well. And you can also change the size of your brush over here. Right and left bracket keys are the really nice ones, but you can also hit space, and this is nice because you see your brush on your model as you're doing it if you don't want to use the bracket keys. I'm going to just do a lot of drawing right here, and see it's kind of sucking it away from the sides. But what it's doing is I want to try to build it up to the surface of this model. And even like this is kind of another way that you can get it. I'm overbuilding it, so this is building over the existing skull. But that's the really nice thing about the refine and reduce. When you turn on the attract to target, it's going to go in and get rid of all of that volume infinitely. See, it's just kind of going and it's creating and destroying triangles as we go. And you have to be kind of careful because, you know, down the sides, this is creating an awesome patch like this. But see, it's attracting to the target all the way out because the target is still existing over there. That's why you have to be careful to use this kind of judiciously if you are above like this. You can kind of go down and hit the draw. Here, let me turn off attract to target. If you hold down the control key, you undraw. You make it go kind of closer. So I'm making it kind of do that around the sides and maybe a little bit in the middle. Now attract to target back on. I'm not holding down the control key and going around on the sides, and you can see it sucking down. In the middle, if I hold this down, it's going to try to attract to target. See, it is doing things, but there is no target to attract to in the center. It only really works on the edges, which is, in this case, very fortunate because it kind of acts like a smoothing tool. And I think that that is pretty good. It'd probably build up some little bit right here, but that would be the patch for this skull. You could obviously do a lot more work with this. Click on this skull here. You're not actually able to click the skull until you turn the magnet off. So now I can click the skull. You know, you need probably a little bit more work to do things in here, but the way that I would do that is I would go into this object and just go to sculpt and probably drag. Make my brush small. Dragging always happens kind of perpendicular to your view. And I'm gonna kind of maybe drag that in, drag this over, and this up, and this down. Looks pretty good. If you don't want drag, you can also do the move tool. The move also would work. I'm just gonna move that down. Kind of like that. Now that is matching that little area right in there. And it looks good. I'll turn on the target again and do the same thing. Sculpt, draw, attract to target all the way on, and it should kind of suck right to the edges right there. And see, it is building up a little bit, but then it will stop building up after a while unless you make the edges bigger. You see, I'm not touching any edges, and it's just building. It's not doing anything. But once I build up the edges, now there's more for this to attract to, and then you get more volume. You can get some weird results with this, especially when you start working on the edges. So it's really good to make sure that the edges are correct, but you can kind of go, you know, how you want. It's a very cool effect. And we are left with an object that looks like this. Pretty darn neat. Now, one of the issues with this, we do analysis and we say thickness, is that there's a big difference in thickness across this whole thing. That might be totally fine for your manufacturing methods, but you know, that is something that you would just need to kind of keep in mind. Let me bring this back out and let me talk here. That's just something you need to keep in mind. Now, of course, if you're making plates for surgical modeling, you don't really care about manufacturing techniques because you'll have access to really awesome tools that can create things that are custom. But that is one way to do it in Meshmixer. I don't see any other questions besides Juliana's comment, so I want to make sure that I show you also how to do this in Fusion. Now, Fusion is a solid modeling tool, and it is kind of different, but it can use meshes to create solid models. Let me show you what that would look like by screen sharing, like that. Okay. And move this over here so I can still see the chat. Let me just move this over here. Awesome. Okay, we have the skull inside of Fusion, and I just brought this in. I just went to Insert and Insert Mesh, and I brought the skull in like this. You can kind of see that it shades it in a different way, but it is essentially the skull. Now, the difficult thing with Fusion is that you can do what are called mesh slices. You can go into, say, Sketch, Mesh, and create mesh section right here. And you say this body, but this only does it on essentially one plane. We can go in and try to create a mesh section which matches the edge of this, but it's not really going to work because this isn't really all on one plane, and the mesh section just really wouldn't do it. That's kind of the problem here. I think for people, that actually should be better. Okay, sorry, just enlarged my screen there. The mesh section isn't going to work. It works really great for things with a perfect cross-section, but this is not a perfect cross-section because it is organic geometry. We need to do something different. Let me open up a new design. Everything with, well, a lot of things inside of Fusion work on something called edges. Or actually, they're paths. This is a cube that I just created, but you can also think of this cube as having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a whole bunch of different edges right here. If I created a sculpt object, conversely, this sculpt object also has edges. If I want to use something like the fillet tool, though, I can't do it on a curved path like this. I would have to do it on a solid edge like that. But that is kind of one difference between the edges. But these are edges. These are anything that you see as a line inside of Fusion can be used for really cool things. The edges can be used as paths for operations. And that's what we're going to be doing with the skull here. We have the skull. I'm going to go into the create form environment, which is kind of the sculpting environment, and I'm going to say create face. Face right here says mode is simple, edge, or chain, and the really critical thing is object snap. I'm going to turn that on. It says an offset of 0. What that allows me to do is, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to create a face anywhere except the origin right here, which you can kind of see hovering behind. It does let me create a face on here, but not on existing objects unless you have snap turned on. So you're gonna kind of see what I'm going to do here. Is I am going to create a face, maybe up like this. I have now created a face. These, if I turn off this, oops, turn off the skull. This face, those 4 points, let me bring it in here. These 4 points match that skull absolutely perfectly. They have an offset of 0. The connection in between is not perfect, but I don't need that to be perfect. What I want and what I'm going to be doing is making the bottom line of all of these faces right on the middle of the skull opening. I'm not going to do simple, I'm going to do edge. And what I'm going to do is it allows me to kind of highlight this edge and make a new edge. I don't care about the top side. I only care about this bottom one. And what I'm going to do is kind of go around here and trace what I consider to be the center line of this skull. Where there's a lot of curvature, I'm going to create more faces. And where there's less curvature, I'm going to create less. Again, I'm only caring about this bottom line. And I would be much more painstaking if I was doing this, but I'm just going to create kind of big ones right now. Big one here until we get to a curved area. Do a little bit tinier one here, another big area here. And this is where I want the patch to be centered, and I'll kind of explain that later. And I want the patch to come down here. Now, I'm going to go right up to the edge right here, and I can create a face that is snapped to these two and snapped up here. Totally fine. That is my edge. And very quickly, I'm just going to kind of go through here. Again, I don't really care about the top ones. I only care about the side ones. And when I get back to my starting point, I'm just going to click to that, and there we go, and say OK. Now if we turn off the skull, I've created this around the skull. So Juliana is asking, is it important that these faces are four-sided? Yes. Meshmixer and 3D scans work in tries. You know, everything inside of Meshmixer are all triangles. No possibility of having anything else except triangles. Inside of Fusion, I certainly could create a face up here that is a new face with snap of multiple sides. So what I could do is I could create a face like this, you know. But the problem with that is that quads are very easy to it's hard to describe. Quads are the standard by which all solid modeling tools work. As you can see, if I go into a sculpt environment on a new design like this, and I create a box, and I start to just create kind of new shapes from this, it replicates all of these quads. Quads are very easy to deform, right? So if we do kind of editing of this and move them, it's very easy to mathematically say how these work. If you do things with triangles like this, you certainly can do transformations with that, but it's much more jagged, a sort of thing, and that's just because of the math of how this works. It's easier to figure out mathematical computations for quads than it is for tries. So this is what I'm kind of showing in here, is that you can use the tries as a template to create quads, and then everything inside of solid models are quads or more. You could have 5-sided, 6-sided, but you start to get into some weird things with more than 4 sides. You want to try to keep it on 4. I'll come back to that later, or you know, ask another question. This is, remember, I didn't care about the top edge, didn't care about that one. I only cared about the bottom one, and the bottom one is matched really, really well to that part of the skull. Now what I can do is I can double click this, and I can go to Subdivide if I want to, and I can subdivide. It looks like it's not letting me subdivide all of these at one time. Actually, what I can do is I can right click on this and say Insert Edge. I don't want it that way. Now, sometimes I'm not entirely sure why this happens. I would want to select this entire thing and subdivide all of this just to get a little bit more points on here, but it looks like it's not letting me do that. I could certainly do it one by one like this, and I can say specify I don't want any length faces, but I do want width, and that would give me more points down here to snap to, but I'm not gonna do that. So now I'm gonna finish form. I didn't even need to thicken it or anything because I'm just using this edge. Now you can see I'm not in the sculpt environment at all, but I am in here and I have this line, and that is the really critical thing. Let me go back to my video here. Bill, can we do similar things with 3D sketches rather than patches? Totally, absolutely. 3D sketches create paths, and you could totally do that. The way, let me share my screen again. And bring that over here. Totally, I could create a sketch, on whatever plane that I want, and then go in and, sketch a spline. And I would have to right click on one of these spline things, because you see the spline is on this plane. Right click on this and say move, and that actually gives me a 3D move cursor, and I can move this up in 3D. So you can see now that that spline is in 3D. Absolutely, this is a totally valid path. I just don't think that you can do any sort of snapping to meshes. Certainly 3D splines can totally be used in the next part of what I'm going to be talking about, but they can't do any snapping to meshes. But you could kind of, eyeball it if you want. You could put things over there, certainly. But I'll just undo that and back out. Okay, we have what I would say is a center line right here. Again, we don't care about this. I am going to create a sketch. Now, what I want to do is I want to get a good cross section of this this area. So I want to create, I can say, a plane along path right up here under construct, and I can select this path. And what it does is it creates a 90-degree plane facing whatever at 90 degrees to wherever that path is. So I'm just going to maybe select something right there and say, okay. Now I have a plane. I'm going to say sketch, create sketch on this plane. You can kind of see the skull is there, everything. A nice kind of trick for this is to click slice, and what that does over here on the right is it gets rid of everything in front of that sketch plane. So now you can see that we have the edge of the skull here, and this is my sketch plane. I am going to create my patch. I'm going to create maybe a spline like this and say, in a very general sense, I am going to want something that is vaguely shaped like this. Actually, let me start here. I'm going to create something that is vaguely patch shaped like, no, one more try. That is very vaguely patch shaped like this, and comes back out. Say okay. You see there's some bit of issues right here. I'm going to make maybe this a little bit nicer. But this is kind of a vague way that I am going to be creating something. All right, we have this, which is at a perfect 90-degree angle, and let me actually go in and shorten this quite a bit, like that, and like that. All right, now this is really cool. We go into the patch environment, and we create a sweep. So a sweep means I want to sweep this profile That's why it's not working. I selected revolve. I want to do sweep. All right. I want to sweep this profile on this path. And what I have done is it didn't quite match up. Not entirely sure why it didn't match up like that. Well, anyway, we can deal with that and say, okay, let's turn off our skull. That we now have a shape that maybe didn't do the best. didn't do the best. So let me go back out and edit my sketch. And I can maybe do this a little bit easier. I won't use a spline. I'll just use an arc. Now this arc won't, no, actually, let me do this one other way here. Back out of that. Kind of forgot my workflow. I have my notes right here. Actually, a very good way to do this is you go back into the model environment, say create form, and you can create a sweep. We can create a sweep of this object off of this path, and that creates an object that we can then manipulate. This is a sculpt object. I can select and do edit form with all of this. I can do some scaling of this. I'm going to kind of scale this up, or actually down in the center. I don't need my skull anymore for right now. You know, there's some issues with this, but I will solve those. And I can edit form for this side and scale this in as well. Make it a little bit nicer here. And we can go in and say modify and fill hole for the bottom one, and fill hole for the top. And hopefully, when we do a finish form, it kind of comes out. So it didn't give any complaints. I bring back my skull, turn off my surface body, and I have something that is somewhat of a match for my skull. Now I can go back in and start doing some other kind of commands with this. I can use the modify and pull command right here to pull the rest of this to the closest mesh. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Looks like it's not working. What I can also do with any of these is just go into edit form with object snap. And if I click on an object and move it, it will snap to, it should, not entirely sure why it's not doing that. It will snap to the closest mesh object. It's trying to, like that. And it's kind of snapping to there. This is a little bit harder way, but what it does is, you know, with a little bit more refinement, is that you can get a very kind of customized shape. And see, I don't really need this profile anymore. I can turn it off. I have a sculpt object that I can, you know, kind of start manipulating and changing, and it is a solid model. You know, with a little bit more work, I could create something that really, really matches inside of here, and it's a full sculpt object, so I can go and, you know, start making changes. I can do the modify pull command, you know, for the whole thing if I wanted to, you know, pull to the skull like that. It kind of messed it up. This won't be a valid thing if I try to exit, but it matches. So that is kind of another way. I have a question. Okay, here, let me go back out and bring this over here. So the question is, in what materials can you print this graft out? I mean durable and biologically compatible materials. I am not a doctor, so I can't say for sure, but I know that there are biocompatible materials. For something like this, I would assume that this would be printed out of titanium. If you go to the DMLS, so direct metal laser sintering, if you go to the DMLS world, people get titanium implants all the time. So I certainly have seen titanium implants be created, for sure. I have no idea if that's the only material or if there are other materials out there that would actually be okay to implant in somebody's body. I am not sure. Ask any doctor besides me, because I'm not one. There's another question. Is there a way to turn off the ghost form when you go back into editing it? There certainly is. Let me share my screen here. Like that. I believe it's in the settings here. If you go up to, if you can't see it, that might be better. If you go into settings up here, under preferences, I believe there is something inside of here that allows you to, for sure there is. I just need to kind of look through here. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Show ghosted result body under design. If you turn this off, then you won't see those shadows of like existing or previous models. You'll just see what you're working on. In this case, I also had the ghost. I'll just return, kind of undo all of that until I fixed it. But that should work. Yeah, so I also had that kind of patch object you can see here, but that's actually a valid object. It's not a ghost. But if you didn't want to see that, then yeah, you would just do that turn off ghosted thing. So let's see. There's also another question here. The kind of a follow-on question about the medical grade materials. Do I recommend outsourcing titanium printing service? You know, let me go back to actually view here. To me, titanium is titanium, but I'm sure that there are ways of making that are more, you know, I don't even know if it's not even FDA, like in the US, compliant, you know, from printing services that are certified to do medical implants. I'm sure that there are some. There is a good service that I might refer to, one called Forecast 3D here in the United States, Forecast, that I know does that. If I Forecast 3D. So I know that they do things like that. They have all a bunch of different things, but I know that they also do DMLS. I don't have any pictures right here, but I do know that they do that. But then again, I don't know. I'm sure there's some certification things, because ones from unapproved labs might have powder on them or other things. So I would just check with colleagues or things like that. There is another question on here. Is there an easy way to using Meshmixer to make a non-planar cut through two coaxially aligned cylinders of different diameters? To make a non-planar cut through aligned cylinders. Okay. Let me bring back Meshmixer here. Doot, doot. In a very general sense, and you know, I would need to see your file to do this, but let's just bring in a cylinder. I'm going to Meshmix in a cylinder, and I'm going to Meshmix in, or actually just T and D, D for duplicate. I created a duplicate, and I'm going to delete this little guy. Okay. Non-planar cut. Make this little guy a little bit bigger. Like that. And I don't know, make this guy a little bit bigger. If we have a cut, like let's say we bring in, how to kind of show this. So bring this over here. A plane, and I'm going to create a new object. Okay, we have a plane. I'm going to transform this little, that was not intended. Okay. If we have a non-planar cut in this, so let me kind of widen this out. And you said non-planar. What I'm going to do is going to make this non-planar by, or actually extrude this out and then do some sculpting on it. You know, something like that. Now I'm going to transform this guy into here and turn it 180 degrees. Or turn it whatever, just so it bisects it. Okay, I'm going to do a Boolean difference. Awesome. Not awesome. We go back in and auto reduce result. I do not want that. Okay, and now, and so I'm going to select this, expand it, delete it. Okay, we now have a non-planar top to this object. You could do actually a couple of different things to this to get this top over onto this cylinder. One way to do it would be to make a positive of this. I just deleted the positive, but assuming that you don't have the positive of this, what you can do is bring in a helper tool like this. I'm going to make this kind of bigger like that. Say accept. This is not at all enough. I'm going to, not enough triangles. I'm going to select it and remesh it. I don't care about linear subdivision or not. Remesh accept, do remesh again to get a lot more. That looks about good. Now I did a Boolean difference of that. So I now have the positive of the top of that cylinder in this cube. You kind of maybe can see it, maybe can't. I could do some other things like, you know, kind of chopping off this. I can do this with crease angle. Try to select some of these just to kind of get this down if I wanted to. This is probably not going to be the best result here, but we'll see. Well, I mean, you can kind of get my idea. So let me undo that. I now have a positive in this. If I wanted to kind of cut this out, what I would do is I would go to edit to create pivot. I can be very, very accurate with you know, adding in pivots to certain places, but I'm just going to put a pivot right there. Did I do it? Nope. Like this, and then for this, I'm going to create a pivot here. And this is totally inaccurate because I could do this a lot more accurately, but I'm going to drop a pivot on there, and then you can just drag one. You should be able to see that this was an issue. This is actually a good thing to bring up. When I created this pivot right here, I didn't have link to target on, and so it wasn't actually linked. So I'm going to drop it there, and now it is linked. Okay, you should be able to go like that. And now I have moved that there. See, it's not perfectly aligned, but if the pivots were aligned, it'd be nice. Actually, I just said translate only because this was actually at the same size, like that. That Boolean difference. See how well this works. worked a bit. You know, with pivots and all of the moving, I could do that. But using pivots and creating kind of a stamp like that would work. There would be other ways you could do this too. One way to do it, just cancel out one of this. One way to do this as well would be to, for any surface that you want to copy, you know, some sort of surface like that, you can just select the surface like this, and, you know, select whatever non-planar surface that you want, and extract it. So you can say Y, and what that will do is it will essentially cut that out. You can also offset it with a 0 offset if you want to keep your initial object. But now you have this surface. You can select the whole surface. You can, actually you'd want to offset it. Offset with connected, you know, inwards, -1 millimeters. And what that does, did that do that right? No, actually extrude on the normal -1 millimeter. So what that does is it kind of created a horrible shape on the bottom, but you now have a solid on the top, and you can always do things like do a make solid on it to kind of fix all of the bottom parts. The bottom part is horrible because I just did this fast, but the top part is nice. And now I have a perfect solid that I can use as a cutting tool for other things, or I could append this on, different ways of doing that. So hopefully that helps answer your question about how to use tools in one places, right? If you can turn something into a cutting tool or a Boolean tool, that's how you can copy those things from one place to another. How you move things from one place to another accurately is using pivots. Or you can use the transform tool with snapping enabled if you know exactly how many millimeters things are away from each other, but sometimes that's not entirely accurate. There is, if you're working with things that are totally different, you can use the align tool, the align to target. I just have like 2 minutes, but this is a really useful tool for people that, what would be the best way to show this in a very quick way? If you had one object, I'm just going to put in, you know, kind of 2 skulls or something like that here. You can use the align to target command. What that does is, it's actually a very powerful tool. It was added in a later release of Meshmixer. Is you would want to, let's say this came in like some weird angle like this. What you would want to do is you would want to get your target object like as much aligned as you can to your other object. So I'm going to kind of put these vaguely here. They're still kind of off, and it's, you know, you have some like weird angle right here. And you try to get it as best you can, something like that. And then what you can do is you turn on the one that you want as the target again, like this. Even transparent target is fine. And then you select your existing object and you hit the select tool. Now, if you wanted to align the foreheads, I'm going to select right here on my kind of weirdly positioned object and go say edit align to target. And what that will do is it will try to align your selected area to your ghosted area. And you can, you know, iterations as many as you want, improve solution. It's not totally perfect in this case, but it is much more aligned than it was before. If I turn off the ghost, you can see that the forehead is aligned, and now you could, you know, maybe do a little bit more manual work to move it a little bit like this. You say, okay, the foreheads are pretty much aligned. I'm going to move this in. It's still not perfectly aligned. I'm going to turn on the magnet, go like this. Maybe select more. I want to align it over here. try to align it over here, here, and maybe to the back as well. Let's see how that works. Edit, align to target. And this is a bug in Meshmixer in the latest version. You have to kind of move your mouse and then it'll come back. Improve solution, accept. And now they're getting pretty darn close to each other. And you can go in and do some more alignments. Remember, I didn't select anything on the bottom. You might want to try that. A whole bunch of different ways to do alignments and all of that inside of Meshmixer, just like there are in all solid modeling tools. And awesome. Glad that helped you, Daryl. And Juliana, I like 3D printing the negative shape and then molding a known good material. Yeah, no, totally. That is totally doable. A lot of people in the traditional manufacturing world, go and model something, and then they model the positive, and then they go and they make a negative out, with whatever material. If you get the parting lines right and all of that, you can actually just print the negative. You don't need to print the positive if you're pretty sure of where you're going to cut, have parting lines for the molds to separate and all of that, and all of that. Awesome. And there's some discussion about polymers and things inside of here, so the people on the replay can actually see that replay. All right, we're just at the top of the hour, so I really appreciate everybody joining in and watching for this hour, and this will go up on our YouTube channel. Again, send me emails if you're students of the classes. I am more than happy to help kind of answer your questions. If it's a kind of a long thing where you need me to record videos, I charge consulting time for that. But if you just need questions about how to do something or workflows, I'm more than happy to help. And then my email address is, I think I could probably put that up, nick@honeypoint3d.com. If I show this on here for the people on the replay, you can kind of see it, but it's just nick@honeypoint3d.com. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you next month. Bye-bye.